Against the background of this character of the republican history of Rome, odious princeps like Nero or Caligula look quite harmless. They were just that, odious, vigilantes and revelers, who entertained themselves at will at the expense of the state. At least, the Caesars of the early empire could not be said to have had the blood of Roman citizens on their hands and shoulders. The same man was almost the most repulsive in the annals of the Eternal City, and his image has survived to this day, a ruthless tyrant and murderer. And outwardly he did not make a favorable impression. On the dead pale face, covered with disgusting scarlet pimples, burning fanatical glitter bright blue eyes. Plutarch later wrote that his face resembled a mulberry sprinkled with flour. The skull was as if cut out with a chisel, rough cheekbones, large nose, prominent forward chin. The man's name was Lucius Cornelius Sulla. And we will now try to understand who he is in reality, not in the descriptions of his enemies and biased historians. Origin, tasks and fate of Sulla were unique in their kind. He came from the oldest patrician family Cornelius, who gave Rome many great statesmen. Enough to remember Cornelius Scipio, who fought Hannibal and finally put an end to the Punic Wars. Nevertheless, the Cornelius branch of Rufinus Sullus was in decline by the 2nd century BC, and Plutarch, as one of the main biographers of Sulla, points out that on the death of his father, who left no will to Lucius Cornelius Sulla, he did not even have a house of his own, which in those days was considered a manifestation of extreme poverty. For a poor Roman citizen, practically the only option for advancement in the career ladder was service in the army. About the first appointment of Sulla to a military position is known only that at 31 years old, a very late age by Roman standards, he became a quaestor at Gaius Maria, the famous reformer of the Roman army. The quaestor was an assistant to the consul without any specific duties. Quaestors could do anything from supply and food procurement to the actual command of individual units. Sulla was tasked with forming an auxiliary cavalry force and then moving it to North Africa, where the Republic was engaged in the protracted Jugurthine War, which we will discuss in more detail one day. Africa was Rome's most important grain supplier, and the Eternal City was obliged to keep control of the strategically important agricultural region. Sulla brilliantly copes with the task, receives from Maria the post of propraetor and shows considerable military and diplomatic talent. It was thanks to the activities of Sulla Numidian king Jugurtha was captured. Sulla, however, immediately handed Jugurtha Gaius Maria. The latter in Rome awaited a well-deserved triumph, but it is this fact becomes the cause of further strife and enmity between Marius and Sulla in Rome. Openly said that the victory in the Jugurthanskoye War won thanks to Sulla, and the honors and trophies received Gaius Marius. At that time on Rome fell a monstrous threat, the invasion of Cimmers and Teutons, about which we have already described in detail. Sulla under the leadership of Maria again achieves significant successes, causing the envy of the consul, and after a quarrel with Marius goes under the command of Quintus Lucasius Catulus, a commander, frankly speaking, absolutely untalented. As described by almost all Roman historians, Plutarch claims that Sulla wished to advance against the background of incapable commander, but it should be remembered that the moralist Plutarch Sulla did not like Sulla, and what, in fact, in this criminal, to take over the leadership of the army, if Catulus does not cope. The first really serious victory Sulla was the Battle of Versailles. He was already a legate and held back the Germans in the center, while the legionaries of Maria made a flank bypass. Even unkindly inclined Plutarch mentions that the second commander Catulus was a very nice man, but not so capable commander, and if the Roman army survived at Versailles against the quadruple superior numbers of the enemy, it is the merit of Sulla and no one else. It should be separately noted that after the battle, both consuls, Marius and Catulus, strongly quarreled, arguing over who had made the decisive contribution to the victory. Kimverskaya War ended with the complete defeat of the barbarians. On the African front also established a lull, and Lucius Cornelius Sulla, enjoying the deserved fame of an excellent military, began to think about a civilian career. He was elected praetor, administrative and judicial position. Then the Senate sent him governor in Cilicia, where Sulla with a small detachment, pacifies Armenian king Tigranes and his Cappadocian allies and negotiates with the Parthians. On his return to Rome, Sulla tries to put his candidacy for consular elections. But his plans were thwarted by the so-called Allied War, which became the first herald of the civil war in Rome. I would like to recall that Roman citizenship gave its holder many advantages: legal protection, full property rights, prohibition of torture and corporal punishment, and so on. The so-called allies of Rome, that is, the Italic tribes living around Latium, did not have citizenship, and, accordingly, had no right to cultivate the lands that were part of the agricultural fund of the Roman Republic and belonged to the state. The problem was aggravated by the fact that they were mostly in the Allied territories, and to eliminate the cause of conflict tribunes, Marcus Livius Drusus introduced a proposal to the Senate to grant citizenship to Italians. But the bill was rejected, which caused the allies quite understandable indignation. As a result, they openly opposed Rome, gathering 200,000 army. The fighting covered almost all of Italy, and, of course, our hero took a very active part in them as a legate. Campaign 90-89 years were extremely successful for Sulla. He won several battles and took such important cities as Pompeii, Nola, Samnium and Echlin. As a result of another surge in popularity, Sulla is elected consul for 88 years and almost immediately appointed by the Senate to command the army, obliged to oppose the Pontic king Mithridates, who decided to challenge the supremacy of Rome in the Mediterranean. However, at this time in Rome itself there are events that determined the further death of the Republic and its transformation into the Empire. As we mentioned above, the two main problems of those times were political reform, equal voting rights and citizenship for Italics, and agrarian reform, fair distribution of land plots. The Allied War brought civil rights to Rome's neighbors, but in the end they were incomplete. The people were divided into old and new citizens, and if the former were supported by Consul Sulla and his friend Quintus Pompey, the latter were supported by the party of Gaius Maria, who, relying on the support of Italics, could pass through the People's Assembly almost any bill in opposition to the opinion of the consuls. New citizens turned out to be more than old. An important role in further events played an ally of Gaius Maria, Tribune Plebeians Publius Sulpicius Rufus. It was he who tried to pass a law on the distribution of all new citizens and freedmen on tribes, territorial electoral districts, which automatically gave a majority of votes to Maria and his supporters. At the same time, the Popular Assembly released Sulla from the command of the army with the transfer of authority to Gaius Marius. Sulla decided to act and took steps previously in the history of Rome unprecedented. He led his army to the Eternal City, proclaiming that he wanted to rid Rome of tyrants. Sulla and Quintus Pompey were consuls with all consular powers, which gave their actions a semblance of legality. 6 legions approached Rome. 2 of them entered the city through the Esquiline gates, and at the foot of the Esquiline Hill was the first armed clash in history of the 2 Roman armies. Subordinate respectively Sulla with Quintus and Marius with Sulpicius. The Sullans won, and Marius was forced to flee the city. A civil war broke out in Rome. Seeing the hopelessness of the situation, Marius fled to Africa. Sulpicius was killed. his head Sulla ordered to nail to the rostra, under which the tribune spoke. All the laws of Sulpicius were abolished. While Sulla's soldiers surrounded the forum, it was decided that not a single bill will not be put up for discussion by the People's Assembly until it is not approved by the Senate. Sulla stood firmly on the position of the old Romans, who did not want to miss out on political power. Sulla goes to Greece to finish the war with Mithridates, and the power in Rome again intercepted by supporters of Maria, who returned from Africa with 60,000 troops, unleashed in Rome bloody terror. Killed Consul Octavius and arranged in the Eternal City 5-day massacre among the old citizens. A revolutionary tribunal is established, which acted against Sulla's friends and Maria's enemies. Hundreds of patricians were killed. The dead were denied burial. In the streets of Rome lay corpses, devoured by birds and dogs. Never before in the capital of the world has not occurred in such a bloody bacchanalia. People were saying that the end of the world had come. Finally, Marius is elected consul for the 7th time and dies a month later, tired of hardship and violence. But the power remains with his supporters, consuls Cornelius Cinna and Valerius Flaccus, in fact, turned the Republic into a repressive dictatorship. Cinna, without any elections, appointed to public office loyal to him people and himself elected consul for 4 consecutive years. Sulla, meanwhile, was at war in Greece, receiving no funding from the Senate and being formally removed from command. Nevertheless, the legions followed their favorite commander. Athens was taken, defeated the army of Mithridates at Chaeronea and Orchomena. Sulla finally landed in Asia to fight with the main forces of the Pontic king. At this time Valerius Flaccus with his legions also appeared in Greek Asia, and Sulla, having made peace with Mithridates, turns his troops against the Romans. After which he decides to return to Italy to finally suppress the revolution. Many aristocrats join his army, wishing to repay the followers of Marius for terrorizing the old citizens. One of the young commanders who brought to Sulla a whole legion recruited from among friends and clients was named Gnaeus Pompey. Rome was taken by Sulla a second time, however, without much resistance. It was time for revenge. Sulla did not bother to ask the Senate to appoint him dictator. Not thinking long, he issued a proscriptione list with the names of 40 senators and 2,600 horsemen who supported Maria, all sentenced to death, property confiscated. For denunciations established a reward of 12,000 denarii, the same amount paid to those who delivered to Sulla proscriburavani alive or dead. Terror of radicals Maria was replaced by no less severe aristocratic terror. At least 5,000 Romans died. Proscriptions were subjected even to those who held neutrality. Sulla's favorites profited from the confiscations of colossal fortunes. So the descendant of a poor family became the last defender of the aristocracy of old Rome. Named after his family name, Cornelius' laws were issued to forever consolidate the aristocratic state structure. Finally, he restored the ancient provision stating that at least 10 years should elapse between holding the same office. Everyone remembered the examples of Gaius Maria, who held the consular office several times in a row, and Cinna, self-elected 4 times. Sulla struck a blow against the people's tribunes, limiting their use of the veto, returned to the Senate all legislative, executive and public privileges. Sulla firmly believed that only the aristocracy can provide wise management of the state. Finally, after 2 years of dictatorship and terror, he dissolved his legions, decreed that no army should henceforth be allowed into Italy, and retired. All those who could threaten his life were exterminated or banished. Sulla walked around the forum without a personal guard, declaring that he was ready to give an account of every citizen in his actions, if asked, and then retired to his villa in Cumae, where he rested from decades of campaigns and wars. He wrote memoirs, hunted, and feasted, no longer interested in affairs of state or politics. He died at the age of 58, presumably from cancer of the colon, and for a long time remained in the memory of the Romans under the nickname, Happy. Sulla defeated all enemies, did not lose a single battle, achieved the greatest power and lived without fear and regrets. He was a natural Roman, flesh from the flesh of the land of Latium. And yet Sulla made a single major mistake, which ruined the aristocratic republic. The name of that mistake was Gaius Julius Caesar. Caesar was on the proscription lists and could have been killed, but influential relatives stood up for him, and Sulla spared the future perpetual dictator. Historians have preserved Sulla's prophetic words. You understand nothing if you do not see that in this boy hides a lot of Marius. And so it was, but that's another story. And we will remember that Sulla the Happy sacrificed his reputation as an impeccable commander in the eyes of historians of the future for the sake of preserving the Republic, which after his death, left to exist only 34 years. The age of empire was fast approaching.